Hi everyone, how are you all going? I hope you're doing well. I've got something really special that I want to share with you today. This is a whole grain sourdough bread recipe that was inspired by a trip that I took recently. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it on my social media pages, but if you follow things there, you will have seen that I took a trip to Victoria recently. I live in Queensland. Victoria is a southern state in Australia, for those of you who may not know. It was a very special trip because it had been something that I'd been planning for a long time, and the original plans that we made to make the trip were for 2021 last year, and it was interrupted by COVID, as a lot of things were. So I think it made it extra special that we're able to take the trip this year. The trip is something that I planned with a lady named Marie Tink from Simply Sourdough in Trafalgar in Victoria. Marie is a baker in her own community. She has a little home bakehouse and she bakes beautiful sourdough breads in her area. Marie is also a teacher of sourdough bread making. She has a business called Simply Sourdough, so she sells the bread but she also teaches sourdough classes. You can have a look on her website. I'll put links to all of this below. Marie is actually the founder and the brains and the brains trust, I should say, behind the Sourdough Baking Australia group on Facebook, which is one of the best places that people go to in Australia to learn how to make sourdough bread. So Marie and I, we met back in 2018 at the Grains Gathering in Trentham, Victoria. I don't know how many other Queenslanders were there, but it was one of my first experiences of country Victoria, and it was so freezing, but I had a wonderful time and I got to meet Marie and a few other people, and it was brilliant. We always thought maybe we'll catch up again someday. If you've seen many of my other whole grain sourdough videos, you may have heard me mention a farm called Burrum Farm. And Burrum Farm in northwest Victoria is the place that Marie and I visited on our trip. I started the trip with Marie and joined her with one of her sourdough baking classes on the Sunday after I arrived in Melbourne. Went to Marie's place, and then after that the two of us drove up through Melbourne, up northwest of the state, to visit the farm, which is owned and operated by Steve and Tanya Walter, and the business is called Burrum Biodynamics. Most of the videos, the bread videos that I've been making in the last couple of years, have used whole grains grown on that farm, and it was a bit of a dream of mine to be able to visit this farm. And I had kind of got in touch with Steve and Tan over social media and asked them if I could visit one day if I was ever in the area. And to my great surprise, and it was such a great honour, they said yes. So Marie and I planned this trip. We went up to the farm, we stayed there for a few days, we had an absolute ball. Steve and Tan were the most generous and patient and gracious hosts you could ever imagine, and it was a real privilege to be invited onto their farm and to see how it works. Burrum Farm is an Australian Demeter biodynamic certified farm and has been since 2008. They started transitioning their farm from a conventional farming methods in 2000. And I don't know if you know much about biodynamic farming, but it is a system that has a great focus on soil health and natural fertility of the soil. It doesn't use any water-soluble fertilizers or pesticides. It's also organic standard farming. But it uses a suite of techniques to really enhance soil microbiology and diversity. They do things like green manuring cover crops, multi-species cover crops, minimal tilling of the soil, and really focusing on that natural fertility in the soil through the biology. They use biodynamic preparations that they spray onto the fields once a year, and that really gives, it's kind of almost like a sourdough starter idea, Steve explained to me. It sort of helps to boost the microbial activity and health of the soil. So these beautiful grains that I mill to make my flour, to make my everyday breads, are grown on this property, and I'm just so impressed by the way that they look after the soil and the land, and producing really top quality produce for Australians like me who are lucky enough to be able to get this grain. So I could go on and on and on about how much I love these people and their farm. It was really very special. We went to a yoga class. Tan took us along to their woolshed workout, which was pretty awesome. And yeah, we literally stayed on the farm for a few days, so it was just brilliant. There was one morning that I was lucky enough to spend a little bit of time catching up with Steve about his sourdough bread making. I knew that Steve made the bread for the household, or from what I could tell from their social media. And I knew Steve had seen some of my videos and tried some of my recipes and things. So it was really, really nice to talk to him. And I asked him what his daily bread was. You know, we were there staying on the farm and they had this beautiful bread that we were eating every day. And I asked him, how do you make your bread? And he was gracious enough to share his recipe with me. So that's what I'm going to do today. This is Farmer Steve's whole grain sourdough bread. It is made with grain that is grown on Burrum Farm. Their scout wheat, which is a hard white wheat, their spelt, and also rye. Now my rye doesn't come from Burrum, it comes from whole grain milling. It's a massive big bag that I've got in my freezer that I've had for a while. But you can also get rye from Burrum Farm. In terms of grain availability in Australia, you really do have to be open to what's available, because these farms, they're not factories. You know, not everything works every season in the same way. Yields can change, environmental factors can change, weather can change. So sometimes you might have one type of pantry produce more available than other times. And it's really good to roll with that and see what you can get from where. And that way you're sort of spreading the love too amongst the different producers and helping people who are dedicating their lives to growing food for people, to feed people, helping them to sell their produce when it's at its peak and when they've got a lot of it. It makes sense to buy what's available and not be demanding people have this, just what I want available all the time. It's good to roll with it and use what we've got in the community. When Steve makes his bread, he makes a really big batch, and I think he bakes 5 or 6 loaves at once. He gave me the measurements of all of the flours that he uses, and I converted those to percentages so that I could scale it down to something that was more manageable for me. You know, we've all got different kitchen setups and different ways that we like to make our bread. I tend to just make mine 1 loaf at a time, but Steve, he's busy, you know, he needs to save time, so he makes as many as he can fit in his oven, is what he said. To kind of keep this as true as I can to Steve's approach, I'm going to make 2 loaves at once. So I've got these 2 tins, these 2 bread tins that I'm going to use to make this bread. So it's going to be a double batch. If you've got a really massive big loaf pan, this recipe might fit it. I'm going to use 1200 grams of flour of grain, because to get a nice high top on this, about a 600 gram flour per tin is a really good amount. Steve's original recipe was 63% wheat, 32% spelt, 5% rye, with 11% rye starter and 80% water. I've rounded those just slightly to 60% wheat, 35% spelt and 5% rye. So that's what I'm going to do. I've got everything weighed out here, all of the grain. It's just all mixed together. This is the wheat, the spelt and the rye all together. I'm going to mill the whole lot together and then I'll just mix the bread. I did feed up my starter with rye for this recipe. Steve, as I said, does use a rye starter, so I took a little bit of my wheat starter, Boris, and fed it up with rye, so I'd have a really nice, robust rye starter. And you can see it rose up beautifully. It's just been in the fridge. I fed it up yesterday and put it in the fridge last night. I thought that'll be well and truly fresh enough for me to use for this recipe. So I'm going to mill up this flour now and we will get this bread recipe underway. I always use hearing protection when I mill. These mills are not excessively loud, but I have very sensitive hearing, so I always use earmuffs. Don't be alarmed by this, it's just my choice. All right. I asked Steve whether he ever did an autolyse with this bread recipe, and he said that I think he has, but he finds it easier when he's busy just to mix it all from the beginning. And I have to agree with him. That's exactly what I do when I'm busy and I just need the bread to be made as well. So I'm using my big bowl here because I'm making a double batch. Hopefully I can still see my scale to get the right amount of salt in. Steve uses 1.7% of salt in his breads, which is pretty close to what I normally do. I normally do about 1.8%, so very close. So that's just over 20 grams. So I'm going to add 20 grams and that will be enough. 20. Okay, there's the salt. I'm going to mix that through. Steve has a big tub that he makes his loaves in. So if you're making multiple batches, you know, big batches of dough to make multiple loaves, then a nice big plastic tub is handy. I usually only would ever make 1 or 2 loaves at a time. So this big bowl has been good enough for what I need. All right, so I've mixed the salt through thoroughly there. Now I'm going to weigh my water and my starter into one bowl so I can mix them together first. In Steve's recipe, he used 80% water. I actually did a test loaf of this formula, and for me, I must just be so hooked on high hydration doughs, but I felt like for me it needed a little bit more water. So I'm going to use 85%, but Steve uses 80%. So I'm going in with 85% water, which is 1,020 grams. All right, there's my 1,020 grams of water. And to that, I'm just going to zero my scale again and add the 11% starter, and this is rye starter. Beautiful rye Boris. So that works out to be about 130 grams. I'm just going to put this in bit by bit because I've made a little bit more than I actually needed here. It smells amazing. Gosh, making this, every time I try a rye recipe and I make a rye starter, it makes me consider turning Boris into a rye starter permanently. I haven't done that though. Sticky stuff, it does put me off a little bit. I had just about the right amount. There we go, 133. That is just about perfect. Just going to dissolve. See all the bubbles that came out of the starter then? I don't know if you could see that, but a whole heap of bubbles just came out. Just going to try and break this down a little bit. I find it really hard to break down rye starters, thick ones anyway, in water. They take a lot of whisking. But I think for the purposes of inoculating this dough, that's going to be good enough. I love this kind of bread recipe. It doesn't get any more simple or beautiful. Put it all in. Oh, see all those lumps? The rye just does not like to dissolve. Just as well it has great flavour. All right, I'm just going to use my big spoon here now and mix this up. This dough will be fairly sticky because of the bit of rye, and I have hydrated it pretty well at the 85%. But it's going to taste amazing. Oh, so good. I have to apologise too if I seem a little bit lackluster in this video and my voice is a little croaky. As soon as I got back from the trip, I was itching to make this video and I was all excited about it, and then I got sick and it has just gone on and on and on. Not COVID, but a nasty bug. Just getting over it, so I hope I haven't lost the good energy that came from this trip. I don't think I have. I don't think I ever will. Anyway, we just work with what we have. That is brilliant. Now, that looks really wet. That looks really wet and sticky, but you watch, that's going to smooth out a lot. And I might stretch and fold it, maybe. I don't know. We'll see how we go. You could add some honey to this too if you like. I'm just sticking with Steve's formula. It makes a very nice bread. It's actually a little bit similar to the kind of bread that my husband really likes, which is a wheat, spelt, rye combination as well. You can't really go wrong with this combination of flours. And when they're grown in such a great way and freshly milled, it doesn't get any better. Just cover that up so it doesn't dry out and leave it to ferment. It's 12:30 now, an hour and a half since I mixed it. I thought I would give the dough a stretch and fold. You don't have to do this, but I felt like it. Plus I just want to feel it. It's nice to feel the dough. Oh wow, look at that. So this is a bigger dough than I'm used to working with. It's very sticky. Just pulling it up and folding it on itself till it develops a little bit of tension. See how I can't pull that up so much? Oop. Sorry about the drain sounds, the dishwasher's going. And that will do. And let that continue fermenting. Well, I am back. It is now 5 p.m, so this dough has been fermenting for 6 hours and it's well and truly ready for shaping. It looks pretty puffy, and I have done some stretch and folds, so but nothing for the last hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's pretty gassy looking, so I think that's ready. I don't want to leave it too much longer. Just for interest's sake, it's 22 degrees Celsius now in my kitchen, and it was 20 degrees earlier today when I mixed the dough. So it's not a particularly warm day, but not really cold either. Actually perfect sourdough temperature, I reckon. All right, so I know the weight of this dough. I'm just going to divide it into two, shape it. I've greased my tins and we're going to put it in the fridge for the ferment. I'm just going to wet the bench with a little bit of water to make it a bit easier. I'm going to wet my hand as well. And I'm going to fold this to help me get it out of the bowl, just gently. Oh, it's very fragrant. I can really smell the fermentation. There we go. Lots of air in there. Well, scaling bread dough is not really my forte, but I'm going to try and, yep, I'm just going to try and divide this in half. Oh gosh, just with my spatula here. And I'm looking for 1186 grams per loaf. Oh, very close. 1188, that's close enough. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this dough is going to fill this loaf tin very well because I want it to be fairly high, kind of in line with how Steve made his bread. It was really nice and high in his tin, so I'm trying to replicate that look, which gives you a nice big slice as well. So getting them as even as you can definitely helps. When I asked Steve about how he shaped his bread, he said, I think he made a comment about not having the skills or something like that. So he just kind of shaped the dough into a loaf sort of shape, just roughly, and just got it into the tin any way that he could. My shaping skills are not brilliant. I'm kind of just going to do the same, but I'm just putting a little bit of tension in this. And that's all I'm going to do for the shaping. This looks like a lot of dough for this tin, but trust me, it's going to rise up really nice if I can get it in. Using wet hands just makes that so much easier. So that's one. It's very domed in the middle. I'll try and be a bit more methodical with the second one. I never use flour on my bench. I've just always used water. Just got out of the habit of using flour, and I kind of feel most comfortable with water now. So that's what I use. All right, how will I do this one? I might just try and might do a roll up for this one. The point of this is that it doesn't really matter. Just getting a little bit of tension in the dough is all you're looking for. But even failing that, it's still going to be just fine. There we go. So I've got my two doughs. They look really good. I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of whole wheat flour on the top, just to stop them from sticking to the plastic bags. I'm going to put these in bags into the fridge so that they don't dry out. And so it's just after 5 in the evening now. I'm going to bake these sometime tomorrow afternoon. Hey folks, I'm back. It is just about a full 24 hours later. It is 5:10 the following day. I've just taken the dough, the loaf doughs, the bread doughs, out of the fridge. They look very much the same as they did yesterday when they went in, and that is really common for fridge-proofed dough. They often don't look like they've risen up much at all, but looks can be deceiving. You can't really feel much softness either because they're firm from being cold, but you just have to trust the process that they will burst up in the oven. I am going to score these just really lightly, just with my razor. And that's because sometimes when I bake loaves like this, sometimes they rise up on the top, but they burst along the sides, and that really annoys me. So I'm just going to score mine in the top. I don't think Steve scored his loaves. I think he just let them burst up the top, but I'm not sure. But I'm not baking these inside a pot of any kind. They are just going straight into the oven, uncovered. I've got my little gooseneck kettle here full of boiled water. I'm going to pour a bit of that into a baking tray underneath the loaves, and that's going to add some nice steam to the process. And that's it, let's bake them. So I'll just give these loaves a little scoring. I just keep my razor for scoring in a little jar like that in my drawer. I don't have any kids around my house, so that's pretty safe. And I just very gently, carefully pull it out, and that's a good storage method for me. I've never bothered with a alarm handle or anything. I'm just going to give these, I hope you can see, just a really light scoring down the middle to encourage it to burst up through the center rather than at the sides, which can be a weak point. I've got my this little coffee kettle Comes in handy. Just pour that in. You could use ice cubes too. And that's it. Just let those loaves bake. I will set the timer for 30 minutes. I'm going to turn that down to 220 and I'll see what they're like after 30 minutes. Well, it's been about 35 minutes and I'm calling these loaves done. They're looking really good to me. They are looking amazing. This one, you can see the scoring's a little bit uneven. I could have scored it a little bit deeper at that other end. Amazing colour. So they look pretty well done on the top. They're not too dark on the underside. I'm actually thinking I'm going to put them back in for a little bit longer. I want the bottom to be nice and dark like the top. So I'll give them a few minutes just with no tin then. All right, we've got 45 minutes all up now. We are done. Oh man, they look so good. There we go. Now that's what I call a loaf of bread. Sounds good. Looks good. I know it's going to taste good. Thank you for the brilliant recipe, Steve. I love it. I will let these cool off overnight and I will come back in the morning and cut them open and have a taste test and check out the crumb inside. They look so good. I cannot wait to cut into this bread and see what it's like. This is it the next morning. Looking good. It smells so good. Lovely. Beautiful. That's a really nice texture. Quite moist. The crumb is very soft. It feels soft. I'm going to have a taste. A nice bit of sourness. It's really good. You get a really nice sour, but not too sour flavour from the rye starter and the longer final proof. It's a beautiful bread.